Okay, so the Broncos won outright last night as a home dog. And what does that mean? It means all the underdog players out there today are barking just like their pups that cashed last night at the window. And immediately, everybody is going to be looking for that next big dog to cash a ticket. But guys, I'm here to tell you that historically speaking, week 1 of the NFL season, you play the favorites. And historically speaking, week number 2, you play the dogs. Why? Because as I always like to remind you, the opening weeks of any season, no matter the sport, it's the only time you have the advantage over the odds makers because those numbers are soft. Because they don't know anything more than you or I about the teams that we're handicapping and we're about to put money on. What did the odds makers learn about NFL teams in 4 worthless weeks of NFL preseason action? Absolutely nothing, guys. Listen, that was a marquee game last night. And what happens is when an underdog covers and when an underdog wins outright and a marquee game where all the spotlight is on that particular game, whether it's a Monday night game or a Thursday night game or a season kickoff like last night, well, that immediately draws attention to the underdog. Remember last year, Monday night games where the dogs had their run all season long? Well, that immediately brings out all the underdog players. And that immediately focuses the attention of all gamblers on underdogs. And that's what they start focusing on. Now, the reverse is true when I'm handicapping a card. Like, for example, I'm looking at the Saturday college football card all day today, right? I started earlier in the week and I'm looking at it again today. And when I'm handicapping that card, and let's say I'm looking at the games, right? And I'm going, oh, I like this game and I like this game and I like this game. And if they're favorite, I immediately stop. And I go back to the top of that card and I go, I'm missing something because I can't possibly like this many favorites because I know not every single favorite is going to possibly cover. I mean, it's just the law of averages, right? Mathematically, it's impossible. You know, at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, so many favorites, so many underdogs, right? That's just the way it breaks. Again, opening weeks of the NFL season historically, opening week number 1, the favorites generally rule the roost, and in week number 2, the underdogs come back with a vengeance. Again, why? Because in week number 1, the lines are soft. And when I say soft, because the favorites are undervalued, because the line makers don't know how to judge these teams, because what did they see from the starters in the NFL? They saw the starters play maybe 2 or 3 plays, maybe 4, maybe 5 plays in week number 1 of the preseason. And week number 2, maybe they saw them go 1 or 2 series. And week number 3, the dress rehearsals, maybe they saw them play a whole half. And week number 4, what did they see? Absolutely nothing. So how can they really judge the talent they see on the field? It's like I was joking in last Saturday's video report about the Alabama-USC game. And I told you that Alabama was going to kick USC's ass and that line, 12.5, was a joke. I told you that if that game played in a neutral site at Jerry Jones's Palace in Arlington was to be played in week number 3, that Alabama, a 12.5-point favorite, would easily be laying at least 17.5 points, no matter what happened the first 3 weeks of the season. Well, I didn't think they'd score 253 points, but I certainly thought the line would certainly be readjusted based on the fact that the season would then be 3 weeks old. That's what I mean. The line makers aren't dumb. Let's not ever assume they're dumb. They're always going to adjust the price once they evaluate what's happened to the teams on the field. So, week number 1, the lines are soft. Favorites more often than not to cover. So, you've got 15 more games now between Sunday and Monday. And I'm saying to you, that I think when all's said and done, you're going to see 9 or 10 favorites own up and chalk cover come Tuesday morning. But, as I said, the lines will adjust, and then the dogs will have their way in week number 2. And that's the way the cookie crumbles in the NFL. The total yesterday, as I was worried, and I explained to you in the video, that number had dropped from 43 to 42.5. Early yesterday, it dropped down to 41.5, then down to 41. Hey, you saw what happened? As the number fell yesterday and the subsequent result in that price yesterday, and a lot of the guys took it on the chin here at the site. But that's the NFL. Let's talk about a little college football action here tonight as I talk about this game between Maryland and Florida International. That's going to be the first of your two complimentary plays today. Now, last week in the season opener for the Golden Panthers of Florida International, I told you to go against them, and I took Indiana as the road favorite, and Indiana got the cover at FIU. It was a 34-13 final as Indiana rolled, but in reality, let's face it, that was a game that Florida International led 13-12 heading into the fourth quarter, playing at home as a double-digit underdog as the Panthers were getting 10.5 to 11 points in that contest. But Indiana scored 22 unanswered points in the fourth quarter, most of them courtesy of turnovers by Florida International, as their quarterback had 2 pick sixes in that game as well. Didn't help that Indiana not only capitalized on the turnovers, but also capitalized on the fact that Florida International was a little shorthanded because of multiple players that were suspended prior to that contest. But after the fact, in the next day's video report, I also pointed out that, listen, you had an Indiana team that comes from a Power 5 conference. Not a good team from a Power 5 conference, but still, a team from a Power 5 conference playing a team from Conference USA. No matter what did I tell you the next day? The team from the Power 5 conference is always going to have the better athlete. That's just the bottom line. So, team from the bottom echelon, the cellar of a Power 5 conference, is always going to out-recruit and always going to have the better athlete, by and large, top to bottom on the roster, than a mediocre to really not even mediocre when you talk about Florida International team from a Conference USA. That's just the way that cookie crumbles as well. And I think you saw it in terms of the overall depth, and you saw it as Indiana managed to wear down Florida International. But let's face it, the Golden Panthers also shot themselves in the foot because of the turnovers in that game. I think the same thing happens here with Maryland, because Maryland is another one of those teams that, a cellar dweller as well, just like Indiana. Now, Maryland opened up by beating up a cupcake, Howard, at home, 52-13 last week. Terrapins ran for 315 yards in that game. Very deep backfield for Maryland last week, and it showed. Hoosiers, of course, Indiana, taking advantage of Florida International's depth and turnovers, as I told you, winning that game 34-13 in Florida. Florida International, their defense allowed Indiana 486 total yards, allowed Indiana 26 first downs in that game. The run defense allowed 246 yards. Now, supposedly, that Florida International defense had like 8 or 9 starters returning from a unit that a year ago allowed 185 yards. I always laugh when I read about teams that say, hey, they returned 9 starters from a year ago. Yeah, well, the defense sucked a year ago, so they have 9 starters back. They're 9 starters that are a year older. Does that mean there are 9 starters that are a year older and better? Not necessarily. And in Florida International's case, that's what we saw. The Terrapins, they're not a great team, but I do think they're going to be able to cover this number tonight, and I'm willing to lay the 11 points with them in this particular contest. So Maryland's going to be your first complimentary play. Your other complimentary play, I'm going to go with the Chicago Cubs as a run line dog. They're like $1.20 to $1.25 dog here tonight. Now, they're coming off 2 losses in 3 games at Milwaukee as they open the road trip. But I'm going to go with John Lester tonight, who's coming off a 3-hitter at home against the San Francisco Giants. His last 3 road starts in L.A., in San Diego, and in Oakland. He's 2-0 with a 1.42 earned run average. He's 6-0 with a 1.85 earned run average in 9 starts since the All-Star game. Taking on the Houston Astros, who are coming off 2 straight losses to cap a 3-4 road trip as they lost the last 2 games the last 2 nights against the Cleveland Indians. Their bullpen is just absolutely overworked because it has been 8 straight games where their starters have been unable to record at least 15 outs. So their bullpen is just overtaxed, overworked. You've got a Cubs team that, after losing those 2 straight games this late in the season, they got a little extra bonus because they had yesterday off, where the Astros, of course, played again yesterday and now are returning home. That's no benefit for them. They got Lester on the hill. I'm willing to take a shot with the Cubbies in this one, plus the $1.20 to $1.25 to go along with Maryland. And those are your 2 free selections for today's card. I wish you well, guys, and I'll talk to you again on Saturday early in the morning when we do this one more time.